Princess Illyra Vey was not invited to the Imperial Victory Feast because anyone valued her. She was invited because the galaxy loved a cruel joke, and the cruelest jokes were always dressed in silk, gold, and law. She had been the forgotten daughter of a conquered throne, the last living ornament of House Varian, kept alive by the Aurelian Dominion only because dead princesses became martyrs and living princesses could be displayed when convenient. So when the Dominion defeated the last rebel fleets and gathered 800 alien nobles beneath the glass moons of Vale Terran, they brought Illyra out in a faded silver gown, seated her below the salt merchants and above the trained beasts, and announced that the evening needed entertainment. Emperor Kadros smiled from his crystal throne as he lifted a ceremonial cup and declared that the forgotten princess would be offered as tribute to the human envoy. Because humans were sentimental animals, because Earth had refused to bow, but had also refused to send a battle fleet, because one lone human had arrived with diplomatic papers and an old black coat instead of dreadnoughts, the court laughed before the joke was even complete. They laughed at Illyra because she had no armies, no dowry, no supporters, no voice in any living council. And they laughed at humanity because everyone knew humans collected broken things. Stray dogs, ruined worlds, lost causes, dead languages, and prayers nobody else believed in. The guards pushed Illyra forward until she stood beneath the throne lights with her chin lowered and her hands trembling around a cracked bracelet that had once belonged to her mother. And Emperor Kadros asked the human whether Earth accepted this worthless gift. The hall fell silent long enough for the laughter to sharpen. The human envoy looked at the princess, then at the emperor, then at the nobles who expected him to blush, refuse, or bow. His name was Captain Adrian Vale. Retired from 3 wars, nobody in that room believed humans had truly survived. And when he finally spoke, he did not sound amused. He said, "I accept her, not as tribute, not as property, not as a joke, but as my sovereign equal. Under the protection of Earth, and before your court, I call her my queen." The laughter died so quickly that even the glass moons seemed to stop turning. For one breath, Illyra thought her translator had failed, because no one had used that word for her since she was 5 years old and hiding behind a funeral veil while Dominion soldiers burned her father's banners. Queen was a forbidden word now. Queen was a memory locked inside ruined palaces and nursery songs. Queen was the title her mother had whispered into her hair the night the Aurelian Dominion came with plasma lances and judicial priests. Remember who you are, little star. Not because crowns matter, but because people do. Yet people had not saved House Varian. People had knelt when Kadros promised mercy. People had applauded when the last Varian captains were spaced over their own capital. People had watched Illyra become a hostage, a lesson, a decorative relic for 20 silent years. And now this human stranger had spoken the dead word into the heart of the Empire as if it were not treason. The Emperor's jeweled fingers tightened around his cup. Around him, the court tried to decide whether the silence belonged to insult or comedy. Captain Adrian Vale stood alone at the foot of the dais. Tall by human standards, but short beside the antlered generals and armored duke beasts surrounding him. His dark hair was streaked with gray. One cheek carried a pale scar, and his black diplomatic coat bore no medals. Only a small blue pin shaped like Earth, seen from orbit. He had arrived without guards because Dominion law allowed only one envoy into the feast. And the nobles had mocked that too, but he did not look like prey. He looked like a man who had already measured every exit. Every weapon, every heartbeat. Illyra stared at him in confusion and terror. Because protection under Earth meant war if Kadros chose to make it war. And Kadros had never forgiven a smaller power for standing upright. Emperor Kadros leaned forward, his smile returning in pieces. "How charming," he said. "The human mistakes a discarded hostage for royalty. Perhaps your species truly does mate with pity." More laughter came, brittle and relieved, but Adrian did not smile. He turned slightly toward Illyra and bowed, not the shallow bow of a diplomat to an object, but the formal kneeling bow of a soldier to a commander. His right knee touched the moonstone floor, his hand crossed his chest. and the entire Aurelian court watched a human lower himself before the woman they had spent 20 years teaching everyone to ignore. Alira's mouth parted. She wanted to tell him to stand before he was killed. She wanted to beg him not to waste Earth on her, but her voice caught behind years of obedience. A Dominion guard stepped close, perhaps to yank the human up, perhaps to remind him who owned the room. Adrian did not look at the guard. He said quietly, "Your Majesty, do you accept my oath?" The question broke something inside her, because no one had asked Alira to accept anything since childhood. They had assigned her rooms, assigned her food, assigned her dresses, assigned her shame, assigned her silence. And now a human was offering her the one thing every empire feared. Choice? She looked up at the Emperor, at the nobles, at the old banners of conquered worlds hanging upside down above the feast, at the plates heavy with stolen harvests, at the laughing diplomats who had once signed treaties with her father, and then she looked back at Adrian Vale. His eyes were steady, not pitying, not hungry, not foolishly romantic, only certain, as if he had found the line he came to draw and would not step away from it. Alira lifted her shaking hand and placed it on his shoulder. "I accept," she whispered, and the translator carried it to every throne. Every table, every recording drone, that whisper became the loudest rebellion in the galaxy. Kadros rose from his throne so slowly that the musicians stopped mid-note. The Emperor was beautiful in the way predators were beautiful, all silver skin, crown horns, and black ceremonial armor etched with the names of planets he had broken. He looked at Alira as though noticing dust on a blade. Then at Adrian, as though deciding where to cut first. "You do not understand our customs." "Human," he said, "gifts cannot grant rank. Slaves cannot accept oaths. And extinct houses cannot be resurrected by sentimental noise." Adrian stood, careful and calm. "I understand customs very well." He said, "I also understand records, and by Dominion Treaty Archive 9, House Varian was never legally extinguished. Your occupation charter preserved royal blood for administrative continuity. You kept her alive to make your conquests look lawful. That was your mistake." A murmur spread through the hall. Not because anyone cared for law when power was present, but because power preferred law as a costume and Adrian had tugged the costume loose. The Emperor's lower hands clenched beneath his robe. "You come here with parchment and theater." He said, "Earth has no fleet in this system, no allies in this hall, no leverage." Adrian glanced up at the glass ceiling where the moons glowed like captive eyes. "Earth has one envoy," he said. "And one witness is enough?" The Emperor laughed once. "Hard and cold, then by all means witness this," he gestured. And 6 royal guards drew ion blades around Adrian and Alira. The court exhaled with pleasure, because this was familiar again. The Empire correcting a joke that had gone too far. Alira's first instinct was to shrink behind the human. But Adrian stepped beside her instead of in front of her, leaving her visible, leaving her standing. The gesture told the hall more than any speech. He was not rescuing a hidden princess. He was recognizing a queen in public. The first blade rose, and the human did not move. Instead, he said one word into the silent room. "Avalon." Asterisk, nothing happened for half a second. And in that half second, the court laughed again, louder this time, because they thought Avalon was a prayer or a lover, or perhaps the name of the human ship waiting uselessly beyond the orbital minefield. Then the lights flickered. Every recording drone turned from gold to blue. Every translator in the hall reset at once. Terran diplomatic protocol activated. Unlawful detention of protected sovereign detected. Arbitration window expired. Defensive witness net online. The court erupted. Guards shouted. Nobles reached for hidden weapons. Kedro spun toward his intelligence minister. But the minister was staring at his own wrist display with all 3 eyes wide. Beyond the glass ceiling, the nearest moon changed color. Not physically, not by sunlight, but by a sheet of blue symbols crawling across its surface. Then the second moon did the same, then the third, each one broadcasting Earth's ancient legal seal. A simple ring around a blue planet. Adrian finally moved, not to attack, but to take Alira's hand and guide her to careful steps away from the ion blades as the guards hesitated. because their command network had gone blind. He spoke softly. "Your Majesty, walk with me." She was too stunned to obey at first, walk where she breathed. His grip was warm and steady. "Out," he said. "Before the Empire remembers, it can still make stupid decisions manually." The first guard lunged. Adrian turned with brutal economy, took the guard's wrist, broke the blade angle against the floor, and dropped him without ceremony. Not flashy, not graceful, simply final. The other guards advanced, then stopped as every door in the feast hall opened at once from the outside. No human army stormed in. That was what frightened them most. The beings entering the hall were not Terran Marines. They were servants, mechanics, musicians, cooks, prison scribes, water carriers, low-ranked clerks, and debt-bound laborers from 50 conquered species, all wearing the red bands of palace staff, all carrying trays, cables, fire suppression rods, kitchen knives, cleaning hooks, and maintenance tools. For 20 years, Elira had walked past them with lowered eyes while they pretended not to see her bruises. And now they filled every entrance like a tide that had been waiting behind the walls. The court roared in outrage, calling them vermin, traitors, property. But the staff did not kneel. At their front stood old Nara Elira's chamber attendant, a narrow-faced woman from the moon colonies of Sirith who had once smuggled Elira extra bread during winter ration cuts. Nara bowed to Elira, not deeply, not theatrically, just enough, and said, "House Varian remembers its debts." "Your Majesty," Elira almost fell, because she had never known, never guessed, never imagined that any loyalty still lived under the carpet of fear. Adrian's mouth tightened, as if one piece of a long plan had landed exactly where expected. Kedro saw it too, and his face changed. Because jokes did not have networks, forgotten princesses did not have staff movements, and sentimental humans did not infiltrate palaces through the servants' corridors unless they had spent months listening before they spoke. The Emperor pointed at Adrian. "Kill him," he commanded. This time, no network was needed. 3 nobles drew sidearms, but before they could fire, the feast tables exploded upward, not with flame, but with expanding white foam. Emergency suppressant hardening over weapons, wrists, jewels, and mouths. The musicians overturned their instruments and revealed signal jammers hidden inside hollow drums. The cooks hurled boiling syrup over armored boots, and every servant in Veiled Terran seemed to become a soldier for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough to turn a throne room into chaos. Adrian pulled Elira toward a side passage while Kedros bellowed for the palace guard. The princess stumbled in silver shoes never meant for running. Her dress tore on a fallen spear, and the sound shocked her more than the alarms. Because for years every dress had been chosen by captors. Every seam a reminder that she existed for display. When the fabric ripped, it felt like a chain snapping. They reached the passage where Nara and 2 maintenance boys shoved a catering cart across the door behind them. One boy could not have been more than 14, scaled, shaking, eyes bright with terror. Elira grabbed his hand before he turned away. "What is your name?" she asked. The boy blinked as if no noble had ever asked him that. "Jor," he said. "Maintenance 3rd class, Your Majesty." Then he ran back into smoke with a wrench in both claws. Elira stared after him. Adrian tugged her gently onward. "He will do his part." He said, "Now do yours." "Mine," she said. Nearly laughing from panic, "I have no part. I was the joke." Adrian looked at her as they hurried down a service corridor lit by red emergency lamps. "No," he said, "you were the reason the joke worked. The Empire believed everyone had forgotten you, but forgotten is not the same as gone." He turned a corner as distant boots hammered above them. "Earth did not come to steal you away, Elira. Earth came because your people asked whether humanity still answered distress calls from dead kingdoms." She stopped so suddenly he nearly lost her hand. "My people," she whispered. Adrian's face softened for the first time. "The miners of Varian, the exile fleets, the kitchen staff, the prisoners in the moon foundries, the old admirals hiding under false names, they have been sending fragments for years. Songs, tax ledgers, funeral codes, a map made of grief. And finally, a request. Find our princess before we forget how to hope for 20 years. Illyra had believed hope was a childish wound that never healed. They descended through a laundry shaft into the lower palace, where the polished empire became pipes, coolant steam, and walls stained by the hands of workers never shown in victory murals. Illyra's lungs burned, but she forced herself forward, because each level down felt like a secret history of the empire. Above them, nobles toasted conquest under artificial stars. Below them, indentured engineers kept the air breathable. She saw scratched marks beside doors, Varian stars, seraph spirals, orphan prayer lines. Human letters she could not read, all carved low where overseers would not look. The corridor opened into a freight station where dozens of workers were uncoupling cargo pods from palace rails. Nara waited there with a coat, not royal, not beautiful, just heavy gray worker cloth. She wrapped it around Illyra's shoulders and fastened it with shaking fingers. "Forgive me, little star," Nara whispered. "We could not move sooner." Illyra wanted to answer like a princess from oldstories.com and gracious, but all she managed was to embrace the older woman. The station fell silent at the sight, workers staring as if the embrace itself proved something. Then the distant thunder of armored feet returned. Adrian moved to a wall console, pressed his thumb against a port, and spoke into it, veiled to lantern. "Package walking, corridor blue, request ugly exit." A woman's voice crackled back. "Ugly is all we brought. Captain, cargo rail 7, 2 minutes. Illyra looked at him, lanterned. She asked. "My ship," Adrian said. Then corrected himself. "Our ship, if you choose to board it." She almost smiled despite everything. "And if I do not choose," he glanced back, "then I die, defending your right to be foolish here." The absurdity of it hit her hard enough that she laughed once. Breathless and broken, the workers heard it, and some of them smiled as if they had won a battle already. Then the palace shook, and every smile vanished. Kedros had sealed the upper exits and ordered the feast hall flooded with nerve light, a banned weapon that burned nervous systems without damaging architecture. The first reports arrived through stolen channels and fragments, servants down, musicians blinded, cooks executed. The court was alive, furious. And no longer laughing, Illyra gripped the console until her nails bent. "They are dying because of me," Adrian turned from the rail controls. "No, they are dying because Kedros cannot imagine obedience ending peacefully. There is a difference." She shook her head. "Difference does not bury bodies." "No," he said. "But truth decides what they died for, and tyrants always try to steal that too." A cargo pod screamed into the station on magnetic rails. Scarred, rust-colored, marked as waste transport. Its doors opened to reveal 4 humans inside, wearing plain work armor instead of Dominion finery. 2 women, 1 older man. 1 young soldier with a medical pack, all armed, all calm. The older woman stepped out and saluted Illyra before Adrian, Commander Hale, Terran, Observer Mission. She said, "Your Majesty, we need to leave now." Illyra stared at the humans, only for she said before she could stop herself. The young medic grinned. "For in the pod, yes, Your Majesty. Not for in the system." Adrian shot him a warning look. But Illyra had heard enough to feel the floor tilt. The Dominion had scanned 4 fleets. For dreadnought heat. For invasion signatures. Humans had sent 1 envoy, and perhaps something quieter. Commander Hale guided them into the cargo pod as rail alarms screamed. Nara tried to step back, but Illyra caught her sleeve. "You are coming," she said. Nara's eyes filled. "I am staff." Illyra lifted her chin. "Then I appoint you witness of my household. Get in," for the first time in her life. An order left her mouth, and people obeyed because they wanted to. The cargo pod launched into darkness just as palace guards flooded the station. The pod burst from the tunnel into open night beneath the palace cliffs. And Vale Terrence spread below them, not as the court saw it from balconies, but as workers saw it from freight tracks, endless foundry lights, prison towers, ration lines, shipyards chained by orbital guns, and far above, the 3 glass moons flashing earth blue against the Emperor's stolen sky. A small vessel waited on a cliffside loading arm, Ugly indeed, a Terran courier ship with patched hull plates, mismatched thrusters, and the name lantern painted by hand across its side. Compared with Dominion cruisers, it looked laughable. Compared with Alira's life in a cage, it looked like the first honest thing she had ever seen. The cargo pods slammed into the dock, humans pulled them out. The air smelled of storm metal and burning insulation. Across the valley, alarms rose from every tower. Kedros had mobilized the capital fleet. Specks of red engine light climbed into the sky. Commander Hale shoved Alira toward the gangway. Inside now, but Alira paused, because below the loading arm, hundreds of workers had gathered in the freight yards. Not fleeing, not attacking, simply looking up. Seraph women, Orthan welders, Varian miners, Dominion-born clerks who had decided too late but not never. They stood under searchlights with their hands raised in the old Varian sign for witness. 2 fingers to the heart, 1 to the sky. Alira had seen that sign only in band paintings. Adrian stood beside her. "They need to see you board alive." He said, "The ship can wait 5 seconds." Commander Hale cursed softly but did not drag them. Alira stepped to the edge of the gangway, lifted her trembling hand, and returned the sign. A sound rose from the yards. Not cheering, not yet, something rougher. Like stone cracking after frost, then Dominion gunships came over the ridge. The first missiles struck the loading towers below the lantern. Fire rolled up the cliff face. The gangway lurched. Nara fell. Adrian caught her by the back of her coat and threw her into the ship as Commander Hale's team opened fire with compact rail rifles. Alira was pulled inside amid smoke and alarms, the hatch sealed, and the lantern leapt from the cliff so hard she hit the deck on her knees. A human pilot somewhere forward shouted, "Capital Defense Grid hates us. Everyone hates us. Leaving now." The ship rolled between tower beams as gunfire stitched the night. Through the viewport, Alira saw workers scatter across the yards while Dominion troops descended among them. Her stomach twisted. Adrian dropped into a crash seat across from her and locked a harness one-handed. He saw her looking. "I know," he said, and the fact that he did know made it worse. "Why can you not save them too?" she demanded. The words came out sharper than she intended. A queen's accusation from a girl who had never been allowed anger. Adrian accepted it without flinching, because rescue is not the same as victory. He said, "Tonight, we rescued the symbol. Tomorrow, the symbol gives them a flag to gather under." She hated the answer because it was true and insufficient. Outside, 3 Dominion interceptors curved behind them. Sleek and beautiful, the lantern's guns answered with ugly blue streaks. The whole ship rattled. The medic slammed into a bulkhead and laughed like terror had become a habit. Alira gripped her harness. She had never been in battle, only near its consequences. Only among ashes after stronger people decided outcomes. And now, the battle was wrapped around her body. Commander Hale's voice came over the cabin speaker. "Captain, orbital mines are waking." "Our window is closing." Adrian looked toward the cockpit. "Take the river," he said. The pilot shouted back, "The river is a myth." Adrian said, "So was she." The lantern plunged toward the city instead of away from it. Alira screamed before she could stop herself as the courier ship dove between towers, skimmed over palace canals, and sliced through the artificial waterfall that poured from the upper reservoirs into the lower industrial basin. For one blind second, the viewport became whitewater. Then stars vanished, and the ship entered a hidden trench beneath the city. The river was not water, but an old launch channel. A black artery built by Varian engineers before the Dominion paved over history. Mines detonated above them in confused bursts. Unable to track a ship flying under the capital's own bones. The pilot whooped. "I love dead monarchies," he shouted. Alira almost laughed again, but then the ship's side screens showed the palace behind them. Kedros had appeared on every public broadcast, his face enlarged across towers, streets, prison yards, and worker barracks. He announced that a human assassin had abducted the imperial ward Elir Ve, that alien terrorists had murdered loyal servants, that Earth had violated sacred hospitality, and that any citizen offering aid would be purged by bloodline. His voice rolled over the capital like poison. Illyra flinched at the phrase Imperial Ward, the old collar disguised as etiquette. Adrian unbuckled as the ship steadied in the channel and came to kneel before her again. Not as theater now, not before nobles, but before a frightened woman in a torn gown and gray worker coat, Your Majesty, he said. Kedros has given his version. Now you give yours. Commander Hale handed Illyra a small recorder. Its light blinking blue. Connected to what? Illyra asked. Every relay we touched, Hale said, and a few we were not supposed to touch. Adrian waited, patient but urgent. Illyra stared at the recorder. 20 years of silence pressing on her throat like a hand. One sentence could kill thousands. One sentence could wake millions. She almost refused. Because silence had kept her alive. Silence had kept Nara alive. Silence had made pain predictable. But then she remembered Jor running back into smoke with a wrench. Workers raising the witness sign beneath gunships? Her mother's bracelet opening a gate her captors never understood. And Adrian's voice in the feast hall calling her queen before anyone knew whether it would matter. She took the recorder, her hand steadied. I am Illyra of House Varian, daughter of Queen Meles and King Iran. Lawful heir by blood, by treaty, and by the memory of those who were not permitted graves. I was not abducted. I was offered as a joke before the imperial court. And when the human envoy chose honor instead of laughter, I accepted his oath freely. She swallowed. The cabin was silent except for engines. The Aurelian Dominion has called me ward. Relic, hostage, gift, and slave. Hear me now. I am none of those things. I am not asking you to die for my crown. I am asking you to live for your own names, for your children's names. For every world taught that obedience is peace, if you remember House Varian, if you remember any promise broken by Emperor Kedros, if you remember that fear is not law, then stand as witness. Do not waste your life in blind fury. Do not strike where children stand. Do not become what he calls you, but stand, record, refuse. Hide the hunted, feed the fleeing, open the gates that should never have been locked. And know this. Earth has seen us, Earth has heard us, and tonight, the forgotten are forgotten no longer. The message left the lantern like a spark dropped into dry grass. Across Vale Terran, screens flickered, mine loudspeakers crackled. Prison tablets unlocked from propaganda loops. Private implants replayed the princess's torn voice, faster than sensors could cut it, in the capital kitchens. Surviving servants touched bloody hands to their hearts in the moon foundries. Varian miners who had never seen Illyra alive wept into their masks in orbit. Exile ships hiding under merchant flags lit old identification codes one by one. Not war beacons yet, not open rebellion, but witness lights. Thousands of tiny blue stars appearing across civilian traffic lanes. The Dominion Command Network tried to erase them. But every time one vanished, 3 more appeared. And far beyond the capital, on worlds Kedros thought pacified, people began saying the dead title aloud, Queen Illyra, Queen Illyra. Queen Illyra, not because they knew her, but because the Empire had spent 20 years proving how much it feared the memory she carried. The lantern climbed through the lower atmosphere wrapped in static. The orbital minefield finally realized where they were and turned its attention downward. Red targeting lines filled the cockpit displays. Commander Hale strapped herself into a weapons chair. Pilot, how bad? The pilot answered, religiously bad. Adrian stood behind the cockpit chairs, calm in a way that made Illyra furious, because calm men could still die. He opened a secure channel lantern to all Terran assets. Witness package confirmed, Sovereign aboard, Phase 2 authorized. Illyra grabbed the edge of her seat. What is Phase 2? Adrian looked back at her. The part where the Dominion learns Earth did not send a fleet because fleets are noisy. The stars above Vale Terran blinked out. At first, Illyra thought the mines had blinded the viewport. Then she saw the truth. The stars were still there. But something enormous had moved between them and the planet. Not one ship, not a fleet in the Dominion sense. No proud formations, no banners, no roaring engines. But a shell of black objects unfolding from stealth across high orbit, thousands of human machines no larger than cargo containers. Dormant until now, dropped over months from relief ships, embassy crates, salvage barges, and derelict trackers. They opened like iron flowers and projected fields that swallowed targeting lasers, mine signals, fleet communications, and Imperial broadcasts. The Dominion capital fleet lurched in confusion, warships trying to speak through channels that had become oceans of human static. Kedros had searched for dreadnoughts and found none, because Earth had brought something older than dreadnoughts: patience. The lantern threaded upward through the sudden blindness as minds lost lock and drifted like confused insects. Behind them, the Emperor's cruisers fired manually, massive beams cutting through their own orbital lanes, striking friendly platforms, igniting fuel docks, exposing the panic beneath Imperial discipline. One beam grazed the lantern's rear shielding, and the ship screamed. Gravity vanished for 2 seconds. Illyra floated against her harness. Hair rising around her face, Adrian hit the wall shoulder first, blood instantly darkening his sleeve. She shouted his name before she knew she cared enough to shout it. He caught a rail, grimaced, and said, "Still here, Your Majesty." The human medic pushed toward him, but he waved her off. "Check Nara." Nara snapped. "Check the fool bleeding on the wall." And for one impossible second, amid minefields and rebellion, Illyra laughed with everyone else. Then the Emperor opened the Planet Killer vault. Asterisk, the warning glyph, filled every screen. A black spear inside a broken moon, and even the humans stopped smiling. Commander Hale whispered a name that translated as Ash Spear, forbidden in 12 treaties, buried beneath the Palace Mountain, designed to sterilize worker districts without cracking the wealthy towers above them. Illyra understood at once why Kedros had not chased them into orbit with everything he had. He did not need to catch the symbol if he could murder the people who had answered it. The first targeting cone opened over the lower city. Freight yards, foundries, kitchens, prison blocks, the same places where hands had lifted in witness. Illyra tore at her harness. "Take me back." Adrian said nothing, for one heartbeat too long, and she saw the calculation in his eyes. Survival of the Queen against survival of the people. Strategy against conscience. She hated him for needing to think, then loved him a little for answering truthfully. "This ship cannot stop that weapon," he said. Illyra pressed her mother's cracked bracelet to her chest. "The weapon is under Varian Foundation stone. My grandmother built the first vault. Kedros only corrupted it, if any lock remains. It will answer royal blood." Commander Hale stared at her. "Your Majesty, that is not a plan." Illyra looked at the burning world below. "No," she said, "it is a duty. A queen who runs while her people burn becomes another kind of prisoner." Adrian gave the order before anyone could soften it. "Pilot, reverse burn." The pilot shouted that the capital fleet, mines, guns, and basic sanity were all behind them. Adrian answered, "Yes, thread the expensive parts." The lantern flipped in the dark and dove back through broken orbital fire. Human stealth fields bending targeting beams just enough to make the Dominion shoot its own sky. Illyra stood braced beside Adrian as he bled through a sealed shoulder wound, and for the first time she did not feel like cargo being carried by brave people. She felt like a blade being returned to its sheath before the next strike. They crashed into an old service dock beneath the palace waterfall. Hull screaming, engines coughing, and ran through corridors that had become war. Servants with stolen pistols held stairwells. Cooks dragged wounded guards to safety, despite old hatred. Nobles crawled from the ruined feast hall claiming they had always supported her. Illyra passed them without stopping. "Witness me later. If you live honestly enough to deserve it," she told one trembling minister who had signed her family's surrender. Adrian looked at her with something like pride, not the soft pride of a rescuer. The fierce pride of a soldier seeing command arrive under fire. The royal lift recognized her bracelet, opened through smoke, and carried them down into the buried vault where the ash spear hummed like a son learning cruelty. Emperor Kedros waited in the foundation chamber, surrounded by guards, technicians, and stolen Varian machinery bolted like parasites into black ancestral stone. He smiled when he saw her. "Little relic," he said. The human has dressed you in courage. How quickly will it come off when he dies? Adrian raised his weapon. Kedros. Stand down by Tyrone witness authority and surviving treaty law? Kedros laughed. A bleeding primate orders an emperor in his own mountain. Alira stepped past Adrian before he could stop her. Not your mountain, she said. The words shook more than she wanted, but they were hers. The chamber erupted before Kedros could answer. Guards fired, humans returned fire. Nara dragged Alira behind a stone brace. Commander Hale broke through a shield line with one arm hanging useless. The medic pulled a wounded technician away from crossfire because humans were absurd even while dying. Alira crawled toward the royal lock, half buried under Dominion cables, the bracelet burning hot against her wrist. Kedros saw her and moved with terrifying speed. His black blade swept down. Adrian intercepted him and was thrown against the control spine. Alira reached the lock, bloodline recognized. The old system whispered through her translator. Input judgment. She did not know the court codes. She had never been trained for ceremonies, crowns, or weapons. But she knew judgment. She had lived inside the evidence for 20 years. The forgotten princess had been offered as a joke. But the joke had reached the throne room of history. Kedros seized her by the hair and pressed the blade beneath her chin. Give me the command, he hissed, or I cut the human open and make you watch Earth learn regret. Across the chamber, Adrian struggled under guard fire, blood on his teeth, eyes fixed on hers. And he shook his head once. Alira stopped trembling. Not because fear left her, but because fear had finally become too small to lead. She pressed her palm against the lock and spoke clearly. I judge the ash spear unlawful. I judge this occupation unlawful. I judge fear unfit to rule. By House Varian and all witnesses living and dead, I deny imperial command. I deny the right of any throne to burn its own people for pride. Kedros drove the blade down. Adrian broke free with a roar and struck him from the side. The cut tore Alira's shoulder instead of her throat. The lock blazed blue. Dominion cables fused. The control spine cracked inward. And every screen in the chamber displayed one ancient word translated into every living language nearby. Invalid, the ash spear died without firing. Kedros stumbled back, armor smoking, and Alira, half kneeling, half falling, caught a guard's shock baton and drove it into his damaged command seal. His armor locked around him like a coffin. The Emperor dropped to the stone floor. Alive, helpless, still furious, for an empire built on certainty. Invalid was a death sentence. The guns stopped one by one. Not because every enemy had vanished, but because every soldier in the chamber saw the same truth. Command had left Kedros before the crown did. Technicians raised their hands. Guards lowered weapons. Nara crawled to Alira and pressed cloth against her bleeding shoulder, weeping openly. Commander Hale restrained the Emperor in foam while calling Adrian an idiot in 3 languages. Adrian answered that promotion from primate to idiot was diplomatic progress. And Alira laughed through pain because if she did not laugh, she would break. Above them, the palace fighting slowed as news spread. Ash spear dead, Emperor captured, Queen alive. The words traveled through smoke and relay static. Into worker districts waiting to burn, into ships confused in orbit, into prison towers where locks began opening from the inside. Alira rose with help, refusing a stretcher until Nara threatened to hit her with it, and returned to the feast hall where the joke had begun. The crystal throne still stood beneath the glass moons, splashed with foam, abandoned by flatterers, surrounded by upside-down banners of conquered worlds. Everyone waited for her to sit. Because history loved replacing one ruler with another and pretending the chair had changed its nature. Alira looked at the throne for a long time, then turned away. Record this, she ordered. And every surviving drone lifted. I will not inherit the throne of Kedros. I will not preserve the machinery that fed on us. House Varian returns only as service, not ownership. Prisoners of conquest are free persons. Forced debts are suspended. Reprisal killings are forbidden. Surrendered enemies will face public law, not vengeance. And until the worlds choose their own council, I accept provisional duty, Not divine right, not conquest. Duty. Silence held the hall, then old Nara knelt. Not as a servant, but as witness. Workers followed, prisoners followed, even some guards followed, while others simply touched 2 fingers to the heart and 1 to the sky. Adrian remained standing because his knees were shaking too badly to make kneeling dignified. Illyra stepped down to him. "You called me queen when the galaxy called me joke," she said. "Why?" Adrian looked embarrassed in the way only humans could be after causing a revolution. "Because a joke meant to break a person is not humor. It is a test of everyone who hears it. And Earth has failed enough tests in its own history to recognize one dressed in gold." The words crossed every relay still alive. And across the capital, then the moons, then the hidden exile fleets, people began repeating them with her name. By dawn, the Dominion was not gone. Empires never die that cleanly, but its spell was broken. Kedros was bound for public trial. Fleets were surrendering by crew vote. Governors were discovering that clerks controlled food ledgers better than soldiers controlled speeches. And the Forgotten Princess had become the first steward of a rebellion that refused to call itself an empire. Weeks later, when the wounded glass throne was melted into hospital windows, Illyra walked with Adrian through the repaired feast hall, no crown on her head, only her mother's broken bracelet set into a silver wrist circlet. The moons above reflected sunlight now. She paused where she had once stood trembling before laughter. "Do you know what they will say, Captain?" she asked. "They will say a forgotten princess was offered as a joke, and the human called her his queen." Adrian smiled. "Legends are lazy." "Your Majesty, they leave out paperwork, fear, bad landings, and people with kitchen knives," she laughed. And beyond the open doors, the bells of Vale Terran began to ring. Worker bells, civic bells, repaired badly and loudly, calling the wounded city into a mourning no one had been promised. Illyra offered Adrian her hand, not as tribute, not as rescued ornament, but as a sovereign equal walking beside the first person who refused to laugh. "Come," she said. "There is work. Always, Your Majesty," he answered. And together they left the hall toward the crowded, stubborn future where forgotten people were learning the weight of their own names.